Hi, everybody. My name is Amy Alexander, and this talk is obviously called Gestures, Traces, and Time Machines. So I'm going to be talking about gestures in various senses of the word, and how they can be separated in time and space from the bodies that created them. I'll talk about what I see as some of the potentials for that, but I'll also interweave discussion of some of my own work with historical examples. So my work focuses on technology and culture. I usually think about technology as mass media. I've been doing technology-based work since the 90s, so I call myself a dinosaur of digital media art. And most of my art practice since then has been based in time-based audiovisual formats. A lot of it is performance-based work. And I performed for many years as VJ Ubergeek, the search engine VJ. So this is a still from a piece I called Cyberspace Land. That was VJ Ubergeek's main project. And, but if we go back to my origin story, this is VJ Ubergeek or me, as in my earlier identity as a sweaty rock star. So I grew up playing music, and I really was like committed to rock and roll, and also played violin, and they were always teaching me, gesture, and so I thought that's how you play music, that's how you perform, that's what culture is. And so you can see I was a very convincing rock star. There I am in the 80s with Mickey over my shoulder. And so I was a little bit awkward, and so I brought that sensibility, or that reality, I guess, with me into the Cyberspace Land performances. And the Cyberspace Land VJ Ubergeek character. So I was thinking about the intersection between the cultural perceptions of computer users, programmers, and rock stars. So this was like around 2000 when computer programmers were going from this archetype of the nerd, the computer nerd, to suddenly becoming cool because the dot-com era hit, and programmers had money. So, there was this shifting identity, this shifting way we thought about people that were good with computers. And yet at the same time, I felt that we were thinking about computing as this passive activity where we sit hunched over our screens. And so I kind of started thinking about that and thinking about the ideas of the body, the gesture, of liveness with, in terms of cultural practices like music and visual arts. And that's how I actually came to intersect with some of you folks in the live coding community who were also dealing with liveness and that being expressed through the code that you're typing. So I was creating this visual instrument where I was typing, but I was also like waving my arms with, that thing you can see on the left was allowed me to play Pong as I was generating the visuals. I had a Dance Dance Revolution pad, which you can sort of see on the right, maybe you can't, but all of these things would allow me to do performance in these very active ways, although it was also very awkward because I'm awkward. So it was funny, but on the other hand, the form mattered to me as well as the concept. It's performance art, but also I wanted it to function as performing art, and I VJ'd in clubs. I liked thinking of it as a public art or real VJ performance. I also performed in art spaces, but that wasn't as much fun because people in art events sit there and wait for some epiphany, and I just really want it to be this thing that washed over you as you were dancing in the club and you were on drugs, and this crazy text would be coming by. So there was this, it was playful, but I was also serious about what I was doing, and I practiced a lot. Because I was improvising with DJs and musicians, I just do the visuals, and I wanted to be able to improvise effectively with DJs and musicians. So despite all the gadgets, I found myself often improvising on the laptop touchpad as a percussion instrument. Also because I'm, despite that graphic I showed you, I'm probably more a percussionist than anything. So it was kind of, you know, a percussive thing, and I'm doing this, and I'm going, okay, great, I made this instrument, and now here I am tweaking the touchpad. So I decided to try to make a visual instrument system that actually focused on gestures and percussive improvisation. So this was called PIGS, the Percussive Image Gestural System. The idea was I could create a gesture, a physical form, either on an iPad or through waving my hand at a leap motion. And you can sort of see those on the right side. There's my iPads, and well, you can't see my leap motion. And then you could record that gesture, and you could repeat it through the use of the Midi drum pads. So basically, each gesture gets attached to a drum pad, and I can play the drum pads, and each one has a different gesture and effect attached to it, sort of like a drum kit would have different sounds, but each gesture would then replay when I would strike it with a drumstick, with variations based on the sticking velocity. So the idea was to allow this varied repetition of the gesture to provide a structure to the visual improvisation. The content I was working with was generally YouTube videos, and I'd come up with these themes like people blowing things up on YouTube. So here's a performance. This one's not people blowing things up on YouTube. We'll get to that one in a second. But this was a live performance with my musical collaborator, Kurt Miller. And I'll play a little bit of this because the visual quality isn't that good, but you can see, you can at least see me sort of gesturing with the hand waving on the leap motion, and then playing sounds with the sticks, and then I'll cut to one where you can see the screen a little bit better.
권리위의 조작이 국민들의 손으로 시간 선택제 본부를 설립한 지 어느덧 1년이 되었습니다.
So it's, I know it's super dark, but so all of the visuals are generated first by my hand. The sound has some impact on the positions of the points on the thing, and then right now I'm then playing it with the sticking. So now I'm going to shoot to one where you can hopefully see a little bit better. This one's a studio recording, so we're able to control what the visual quality a little bit better, hopefully. And this one is people blowing things up on YouTube. So Pigs was a lot of fun. It also had a lot of gear every time we went to perform with it. And so traveling with all of this gear was financially and physically difficult and limiting. So for various reasons, I wanted to do something other than a performance project next, but I still tend to think as a performer. And I started to think, you know, the physical body has limitations. As time goes on, we deal with the aging process. And what will it mean to perform? What would it mean to perform without the body? And to what extent can the performance separate from and survive the performer? So as it turned out, my next project idea grew out of Pigs. They often daisy chain this way, my ideas. So I'd been working with content for these YouTube videos, and it was getting to be 2015, 2016. There was a lot of interest in how the YouTube visibility algorithms determine what we see and how they influence culture. Of course, you know, this started getting a lot of attention around the 2016 presidential elections. And there has been a lot of discussion of the concept of the YouTube algorithm and how it recommends other videos for you to watch, right? So this is not from 2016. This is like, I just screenshotted this a week ago. So if you were looking up, watching this video about what Putin eats in a day, and you know, for some reason it's making these suggestions about what other politicians eat and military surplus rivals, and the real reason you don't see Arthur Treachers around, I don't know. Right, there's a lot of discussion of a lot of times these videos seeming to lead you to what might be more divisive content. You know, is it radicalizing people? Some studies say yes, other studies say not really. But there's definitely a lot of concern, and definitely what shows up in that sidebar, that ranking algorithm, tend to be videos by popular creators that people have responded to through some combination of views, viewing time, likes, comments, subscribes, etc. We're not sure because YouTube doesn't publicize their algorithms and they keep changing it. So there's all this criticism that maybe inflammatory content gets elevated because it engages us. We fight about it. But the other concern is it increases the visibility of this video, this type of content, and it encourages its production because everybody wants to be at the top of the ratings, and thus it ends up amplifying this societal bias, not only for inflammatory content, but for other types of sensational content like you know, demographically stereotypical content that is likely to get advertisers, and you know, somebody doing something provocative or whatever. So we do know that whatever is going on with the algorithm, a lot of content made by ordinary people without the desire to get their video up there, you know, and make it all sensationalist or even give it really strong production values. Ordinary, unskilled people, their content ends up largely invisible, and they get few or maybe even 0 views. And in some cases, their only audience might be the algorithmic robots that create these rankings. So what about the unseen videos? Who are the makers, and who is being rendered invisible by these robots? So the next project I created was called What the Robot Saw. It's a continuously generated live stream film. It runs all the time, more or less. It uses contrarian algorithms to curate some of the least attention-grabbing videos uploaded to YouTube. So these are videos with very few subscribers or very few views. Algorithms that are some machine learning, some traditional. They edit, crop, sequence the images into a collaged live stream film. Some are computer vision and deep learning algorithms on the back end. And on the front end, it's max MSP jitter. So I'm going to show you a little bit of this and try to show you excerpts and then talk in between.
제가 오늘 첫 설교를 어떤 설교를 하면 좋을까 고민을 하면서 말씀을 준비했습니다. 사람들은 어떤 설교를 좋아하겠습니까? 제가 생각하기에 사람들은 짧은 설교를 좋아하는 것 같습니다. 저는 설교의 길이가 설교의 질을 좌우한다고 생각하지 않습니다. 세 가지 강연을 아실 것입니다. 우리가 생각을 바꾸고 세상을 바꾸는
The 12th of January.
Gracias a nuestro hermano William por la dirección del culto, que allí desde
First piece of jewelry I ever made. It goes back a ways, 1967, Harvard Square, Massachusetts. I worked.
Right now.
So the sound mix is also done in real time. I use pre-trained machine learning model to distinguish speech prominent sound files from files where music is prominent, so that I can facilitate a vaguely smart real-time mix, getting the level somewhere near right. There's actually a lot of machine learning in it where you can't see it. Behind the scenes, I have all sorts of, my best machine learning work is actually just like filtering out spam videos and stuff. So people are really disappointed if I talk about this in terms of machine learning, because they want it to like show all of these things, and the one thing it does show is those text titles, which I'll get to in a minute. But it's actually the exciting algorithms are mostly where you can't see them. Anyway, so besides all of this, stuff about the visibility, what is this film about that just runs forever and it's kind of this ambient thing? One thing I'm interested in is the relationship between our social media personalities and our real life personalities. The theorist Luciana Floridi has written a lot about this, or that there's a feedback loop. What we do online impacts who we are in real life, because we're always having to make this life that we're showing on Instagram or YouTube. And so I'm interested in the social media video side of this. Interested a lot in how we use talking heads. Like those used to be the hallmark of professional television production, and now with selfie culture, everybody's shooting themselves as talking heads, and I just think that's like a really interesting phenomenon. So there's a lot of these talking heads in this piece. The titling. Let's listen to this guy.
Crazy for me. I really like.
So the titling is the one machine learning thing that's visible. I use Amazon Recognition's facial analysis and I basically use the information it gives you, the predicted gender presentation, age, mood, and these other things like eyeglasses and so on. Because I think that's interesting. Like they're very marketing oriented, and so according to the robots, that's our identity. So that's how it labels these things, the lower third super in the documentary. Anyway, back to the gesture part of this story. So I mentioned this grew out of pigs. So these gestures that are creating the graphics, these horizontal swipes, they were recorded. So my pigs collaborator, Kurt Miller, who is more used to working with some of these Midi recording process than I am, worked with me to develop a cue list in Max so that I could record my gestures and my drum triggers. So the points and the gestures are then replayed at runtime, but modified by algorithmically driven differences from what the robot saw data. And the system, of course, is like a MIDI piano roll in a DAW, and we had a talk this morning about, the recording of the gesture and going on since, some of the earlier computer music things. So that's not, all of that, new and radical. But what's interesting to me is that's based on, player piano rolls, which were basically gesture cue lists that go back to at least 100 years, over 100 years, and they recorded gesture and not sound. And algorithms, which are created gestures, in what the robot saw's case, they change every time through, but those algorithms are also a creative gesture. So one person that is very connected to piano rolls is Scott Joplin. He was only recorded on player piano rolls. There's no audio recording of him. Audio recording existed at the time, but obviously was a bit rarer than it is now. So I'm not a historian of Joplin or of ragtime, so I'm not sure why that was, but we know that Joplin as a black performer was marginalized. Ragtime as a genre created by black musicians was definitely marginalized in these really racist ways. People said all sorts of nasty things about it. So Joplin and ragtime were largely forgotten for half a century until his music was used as the soundtrack for the 1970s Hollywood film The Sting. But the piano rolls of Scott Joplin are performance archives and they're gestural traces. So there's a lot of discussion lately about how do we archive digital media art, and how that presents different problems in general than archiving static art, objects, even films. Computational performance art presents another set of problems than static digital art. Algorithms, for example, you can hopefully archive the screen and the sound, but that's not really the point, right? There's the crowd, there's the energy, the happening. And happenings, the word comes from these performance art events from the 1950s and 60s. Participants were given these instructions like lick jam off of this car, and those instructions were the software for the event, but the event was not really about the instructions, it was about the social experience that happened. So you can take a photo of a happening, but it's not a photo of a happening, it's a photo at a happening. But it's a trace. 1960s liquid light shows, another interesting example. These were mixed media projections, took place at concerts and other events. Light show ensembles projected films, colored gels, colored oils. The events were sometimes tied in with acid experimentation and various other experiences. Here we have a couple of images from the Los Angeles light show from the 1960s, Single-Winged Turquoise Bird. And they were known for these really intense collaborative multi-layered projections and improvisation and intuitive collaboration between the members. And film historian Bill Moritz, who was a dear instructor of mine, but before he was my instructor, he reviewed one of the group's performances in 1969. So after verbally describing various elements of the show, he wrote this thing in sort of this Gertrude Stein-like syntax, and what he wrote was, these words are not telling it all because it is a 1960s thing, and most English words are a 14th or 16th century thing. And if Single-Winged Turquoise Bird could be writing it, they would be writing it, but they're showing it, and only always once, because Friday, January 17th, 1969, was not like Saturday, January 18th, 1969. even though many things about them seem to be being the same. And if you not see Friday, January 17th, 1969, when it happened, you will not have a chance now, because it was living, not writing, and this is just writing you are doing now. So always, only once might be a good approach to how we really think about archiving contemporary media performance. The happening can be represented, can be documented, but it can never really be preserved. On the other hand, documentation leads to historicization, and whoever gets documented tends to get best historicized. So Single-Winged Turquoise Bird was a real light show, but these images I'm showing you are from a Hollywood film, if you look carefully, called The Baby Maker. So it turns out, at the time the ensemble was active, the studio, Hollywood studio was making a film called The Baby Maker, and the director and writer of the screenplay knew the, same person, knew the painter Sam Francis. Sam Francis was a patron of Single-Winged Turquoise Bird and sometimes performed with them, and he ended up writing them into the film. And I'll play a little of this groovy music and then mercifully spare you the groovy music. So this is a scene from the film. Oh, it's really dark, but anyway, so at the time, creating film documentation of the visual performance was impossible for them. Single-Winged Turquoise Bird, they couldn't just point a camera at the screen and get a satisfactory result. But the film production company worked with them to shoot and composite layers of their performance, which are projected within the film. Also, since the light show members appear actually performing their visuals in the film, there's actually documentation of the performance. I know it's really confusing because it goes from the light show people to these actors. But there's documentation of the performance, albeit in this very strange mix with these actors in this kind of cheesy 60s movie. Oh, they're passing the joint. So, I mean, what's interesting about this is, like, they were a really highly regarded light show. They were getting strong critical attention, but it's just kind of dumb luck in some ways that they're one of the few that has pretty good historicization. They were in LA, they knew the right people, they ended up in this movie, and they're one of the few 60s light shows that has decent documentation at all. I'm showing you the movie clip, but another one of my dear former instructors, Michael Scroggins, was a member of this film, and they actually have, the light show ensemble, they actually have the whole clip of that, so they have decent documentation. But we still understand. Oh, there he is, Michael Scroggins. He looks different now, but he's preserved for he's preserved for posterity there. Posterity. We understand that it's just documentation at best. As Moritz pointed out, the light shows were always once, could never be preserved. Like a happening or an algorithm, anything performative never can be. So I'm trying to figure out, of course I'm running along on time, so I'm figuring out how to condense this next part. There are two intertwined visual instrument developers from the early 20th century I'd like to talk about. Mary Halleck Greenwalt, who was born in Syria, lived in Philadelphia, and Thomas Wilfrid, who I think was born in Denmark, and he lived in New York. They were rivals. Wilfrid has been better historicized over the years than Greenwalt. For various reasons, Wilfrid became somewhat popular within the art world, and one of them is that the importance of this thing. He had a color organ he didn't perform, it performed itself. And he used these hand-painted glass records, which are awesome looking in themselves, but they're the software for this system called the Clavilux, or the Clavilux Junior was the home version. Light from a bulb was projected through those, it bounced around the machine, and it made these visuals, and some of these Clavilux systems still exist. So even though he was building them in the 30s, and he built some commercial ones in the 40s and 50s, they can be documented on high-definition video now, and they are. And it's still not perfect, but it's coming out quite dim on the projection. You can find these online. But the thing is, people are able to play these now, and they effectively recreate the performance of this system, the gesture of this system, which in this case was not Wilfrid's performance, but of his painting on these glass records, these software discs. And it's kind of like time travel. And this piece will be able to still document itself, hopefully, in the future. Mary Halleck Greenwald does not have that. I don't think there's any of her color organs still extant, but what there are is a lot of documentation of her process. She gave a lot of talks and performances in her lifetime. They were written up in newspapers, and she did a lot of self-archiving. She saved all of her materials, and she often annotated them. She had a plan to donate them to the Historical Society of Pennsylvania after her death, and that's exactly what she did. They have 35 boxes, which the public can request to review a few at a time of her archives. Doesn't sound like a lot until you see what's in them. They have thousands upon thousands of pieces of paper, every scrap of paper she saved, it seems like, documenting her practice and her research. Every newspaper clipping, technical diagrams, lecture notes, jotted ideas, letters to vendors, and notes from the many times she challenged in court what she felt were infringements on her intellectual property, and on and on and on. When I started looking through these, I didn't know what to think. I was trying to find out information about her, and what became clear was that during her lifetime, she never felt she was getting the credit she deserved for her invention. She was always trying to prove what she was doing was important. She spent decades obsessively documenting what she was doing, trying to communicate with historians of the future. And while being able to run Wilfrid's Clavilux has value, there's something in the vastness of Mary Halleck Greenwald's archive, the obsessive performance of self-archiving that archives her work in a way no machine or film of a performance could do. She did what she knew nobody else would do. And this gesture is still somehow hidden in boxes in Philadelphia. So my gesture has been to make her archive more visible to the rest of the world. I live in San Diego, but over the past several years, when I'm in Philadelphia, I go to the archive, I photograph as many of the items at a time as possible, and I post them on a rather shabby internet archive I call the Mary Halleck Greenwald Visibility Project. It's mainly largely performative. It documents her performative, compulsive gesture of compiling this archive the way she knew nobody else would. But I also do, it's a crude, it's very limited by time and time and resources, but I also do give keywords so that people can hopefully find connections between these different materials. So, always, only once. We're limited in our ability to archive performance. A sound or video recording is representation. It can't record the happening. But on the other hand, it's important to consider who has access to becoming part of history, who decides on what terms an artist will be historicized. People who don't have much visibility in their own time aren't likely to end up in movies, and if they do, for people who do, probably won't be on their own terms. Gestures occupy a liminal space. They're performative actions that document performative practices in ways static archives don't. Intentionally or not, they may be the archives of artists who don't have the same access to history as more visible artists. Some gestures can reproduce themselves, allowing time travel to a future that may better document their work than was done in the author's lifetime. They may be a literal, musical, or painted gesture, but they can also be the figurative gesture of an archival practice that performed an artist's own historicization, and they can leave a trace of both the performance and the performer that tells us something more than the static archives they may have produced. So thanks very much.